Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to my That'll Be the Day podcast. And today I'm going to be talking to Judith Potts, who has been working with the scriptwriters for a rather well-known soap opera. More of that in a mo. But before that, if you like the music at the start of this podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. I'll be playing it in its entirety at the end of my conversation with Judith. Okay, devotees of Coronation Street will know that Johnny Connor, the landlord of the Rovers Return, is currently in prison and has developed a visual impairment called Charles Bonnet Syndrome. To ensure the storyline is authentic, the Corrie scriptwriters consulted Judith Potts, who runs Esme's Umbrella, which provides support to people with CBS. I'm hoping Judith is on the other end of this Zoom call now. How are you, Judith?
Hello, Tom. I'm very well, thank you. And it's lovely to be with you today. Excellent.
Thank you for sparing me the time, because I know you've been rather busy.
Yes, you could say that.
To put it mildly. We'll talk about your work with Coronation Street in a minute. I think before we do anything else, tell us about CBS, Charles Bonnet Syndrome. What is it? Because a lot of people won't know.
Charles Bonnet Syndrome is a condition which can develop when someone of any age, and children are not exempt, has lost over 60% of sight. It causes vivid, silent visual hallucinations, which range from disturbing to terrifying. It's very important to stress that it is not a mental health issue. It is caused entirely by loss of sight. When you have sight, there are messages that go all the time from the retina in the eye to the visual cortex in the brain. But as sight diminishes, those messages slow or stop entirely. But for some reason that we still don't understand, the brain doesn't stop. At that point, the brain fires up and creates its own images, and what is seen depends entirely on which part of the brain is firing at that moment.
And it's important to stress that this can occur at any age then, can it?
Yes, it's very important to stress that too. For a long time, people disregarded children, but we now know that it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter what has taken your sight, it's the fact that you have lost the sight. So any age group can develop this. And we are, luckily enough, Professor Maria Musaji is leading some research to establish the prevalence of CBS in children, and also to go on to see what the impact of it is on both the child and the family. Because if it's terrifying for adults, goodness only knows what it's like for children.
Why is your organisation called Esme's Umbrella? I've been fascinated by that, so perhaps you could explain.
Esme was my mother, and Esme was the person in her early 90s who suddenly said to me one day, "I do wish these people would get off my sofa." And before I could say anything else, she said, "And there's an Edwardian tear-stained street child that seems to follow me everywhere, and a hideous gargoyle-like creature that jumps from table to chair. And sometimes I find myself in the middle of something like an Edwardian funeral procession." Well, of course, as you can imagine, I couldn't think what on earth could be wrong with her, except that this must be dementia. But then I thought, no. She does the Telegraph cryptic crossword every day, which is certainly more than I could do. So I thought, well, wonder what we do about this. Went home, happened really luckily to read a tiny paragraph by a chap called Matt Harrison, who at that time worked for Beacon in Wolverhampton. And he described what happened to him. And it could have been written by Esme. So I rang her up and said, "Don't worry, I know exactly what this is. I'll call the ophthalmologist." And that's where it all went wrong. The ophthalmologist refused point blank to discuss Charles Bonnet Syndrome or to tell me why he'd never warned us that this might happen. So I thought, okay, GP. So the GP? Nope, never heard of it. Optometrist? Nope, never heard of it. And at that point, I went online and discovered Dr. Dominic Fitch at King's College London. And I just have to say, this week, Dominic has been promoted to professor. So I'm very pleased about that. At that time, I was writing a health column for the Telegraph, which actually was all about cancer. But I started to write about this, having been to see Dominic, had the diagnosis from him, and I was inundated with emails. During this time, my mum got worse. She found it much more difficult to cope with, and eventually she died. After that, I received an email from a professor at a university in New York who told me what had happened to her mother. Her mother had been admitted to a dementia unit on the advice of the doctor, even though everyone thought she was perfectly sane, but she was hallucinating worms and slugs on her food and in her drink. There was no one who'd heard of CBS, no one to reassure her. So she stopped eating and drinking and died. And that did it for me. I had been toying with the idea of starting some kind of awareness campaign, but that made it definite for me. So I thought, what do I call it? And I thought it has to have my mum's name in. She has an unusual name, so that helped. And then I thought umbrella, because we can shelter everyone under that umbrella, everyone who is living with the condition, who is working to hopefully find a cure. So that's why I called it Esme's Umbrella.
Very interesting. How do you think your mum would feel about sort of effectively fronting this kind of awareness-raising campaign?
She would be utterly astounded. And she'd be saying to me, oh, no, because she was very shy, my mum. But she would be so thrilled that so many people are being helped.
She was a nurse, wasn't she, I think?
She was. She was a children's nurse all her life, which is why the Edwardian street child was so horrible for her, because she could do nothing to help this child who was obviously very upset.
Now, people who watch Coronation Street will be aware that one of the characters, Johnny Connor, who I think plays the landlord of the Rover's Return, has developed Charles Bonnet Syndrome. For people who don't watch Corrie or who aren't maybe up to speed, can you sort of update us on the story? Where are we with Coronation Street?
Oh, we are, well, I can only really tell you about Johnny, because I did really concentrate on his character. So he is now in prison very recently, but for something that he did many years ago that he felt obliged to confess to. And so there he is in prison. He has multiple sclerosis, which has been diagnosed for some time. And that has caused optic neuritis, which is where your sight is impacted. And that has led to Charles Bonnet Syndrome. And he begins to hallucinate things in his cell.
How did the programme makers actually become interested in Charles Bonnet Syndrome?
Well, this was another huge piece of luck, which tends to happen. A lady called Nina Chesworth, who lives in Manchester, told me that, I think she said it was someone at the school gates who was a script writer on Coronation Street. And she said, should I contact her? And I said, yes, please. And that's how it all started. And then I had several Zoom calls with the whole bank of script writers, and I explained Charles Bonnet Syndrome, and we worked out how the plot could be written so that it was as accurate as it could possibly be. And I obviously talked to Professor Fitch all the way through this to make sure that we got it, as I say, as accurate as we can in the storyline of a soap opera, which is not very easy, but they have been utterly brilliant. And I am hugely grateful to ITV, to all the team on Coronation Street, and particularly to Richard Hawley, who plays Johnny, because my goodness, what a performance he will be giving.
Now, somewhat unexpectedly, I've been able to contact Nina Chesworth, who Judith has just mentioned there. Nina has Charles Bonnet Syndrome herself. And Nina, before we talk about Coronation Street, if you could just briefly tell me about the sort of experiences you have.
I developed the condition when I lost my sight about just over 2 years ago. I've been visually impaired all my life, but lost the sight in the left eye 2 years ago. And I never suffered with Charles Bonnet before this. I didn't know what the condition was. I'd never heard of it. So when it happened, it was a bit of a shock. I didn't really know what it was. So I came around from surgery after them trying to save my eye, and I had a little bit of light perception, but I could kind of seen these waves of colour, and they're kind of like a foggy cloud of colour. And I was like to my mum and my husband, I can see. And they got a bit excited. They grabbed the doctor come back and just basically said, no, I can reassure you, you can't see, it's just your mind playing tricks on you. We went off then, and I come home, and as I was recovering from the sight loss, I started the clouds of colour started to kind of form shapes, and they were there all the time. And for the first couple of weeks, I didn't really tell anybody about it until it got to the point I was sat on my own in the living room, and I started to, like, zombie faces started to appear, and they really started to scare me. And they kind of floating in front of my, in where I suppose your central vision would have been. And because I was in the house on my own, because my husband went back to work and my son went back to school, and then I was still adjusting to the sight loss, I was really starting to get scared of these visions that I was seeing. And they were kind of like zombie faces with like no eyes in the sockets and blood dripping. So I decided to speak to my family, and yeah, they were a bit, I don't know, maybe freaked out at first about it, and then they were okay. So we decided to go in full research mode, and that's when I came across Judith and Esme's umbrella. I emailed her, and then from then I've been hounding her and pestering her and kind of getting loads of information from her. And then she kindly asked me to be an ambassador for Esme's umbrella, and it's been my mission really to try and help create awareness of the condition since.
What was it like working with Richard Hawley, the actor who plays Johnny Connor? What did he ask you, and what did you tell him?
It was lovely. He's such a lovely man. He was very kind and patient, and he was very interested as well, very intrigued by the condition and what it is and what it means. He asked me what were the hallucinations that I was seeing, and obviously over the years I've found out that there is definitely a connection between your emotional state and the type of hallucinations that you see. So when you're stressed, anxious, nervous, the hallucinations become sharper, and then that's when you see the more frightful images. So anxiety can trigger this, and then when you're happy and calm and in a better place, then that's when my hallucinations anyway are better. They're just more like colourful and rainbows and unicorns and cartoon characters. Yeah. So, and he found that really funny. Richard liked that as well, because he seemed to be quite holistic as well. So the thought of the connection between the mind, and he was really intrigued by it.
How important was it then, Judith, for the script writers to get things right? Because of course, some of us find it hard to distinguish between soap operas and real life. So were they trying to make it as absolutely authentic as possible?
Oh yes, I think it's very important when it's a health issue that the detail is correct, particularly for exactly the reason you've just said, that for a lot of people it's a sort of a second life that they live through a soap opera. And really nowadays I think soap operas are a voice for this kind of condition, particularly the lesser known ones.
How much detail did they go into? Were you surprised by the level of detail they went into?
No, because when I spoke to them, I explained how it might develop, and I think they just took it on board really, and gave him almost every conceivable hallucination, just to make certain that we covered all aspects really of the condition. It is a weirdly fascinating condition because people see almost anything you can imagine. So if they see people, Johnny doesn't actually in this particular instance, but very often when people see images of humans, they are dressed in a costume of some kind, either military uniform, medieval, Sometimes they see tiny people, Lilliputian-sized people, which are dressed in Tyrolean costume. It's really very, very strange. Why this happens, why people see what they see, we just don't know. But it was important to be as accurate as possible so that people sitting at home who have never dared say anything can think, so this really is a condition. I can actually call my doctor and probably educate the doctor, because I have to say GPs have never heard of it.
That's an interesting point, isn't it, that GPs have never heard of it? And I guess if Coronation Street helps to educate them, that will be a really positive outcome.
It will be hugely positive. Doctors, in A&E are probably equally as unlikely to have heard of it. And the problem is that if you have CBS, and with the best will in the world, you're completely on top of it, you know that you're hallucinating, but if a tiger suddenly appears in front of you, you will react. We all would. And that sometimes leads to the person falling over, either because they lose their balance or they trip over something that's actually there. That may require a trip to the GP or the hospital doctor. And that's when they have to make a decision, because they probably realize that the GP has never heard of CBS. And if they say, well, the thing is that this tiger appeared in front of me and so I fell over, the first thing the GP or hospital doctor will do is send them down the mental health route, which wastes precious NHS resources and also causes much more distress to the person involved. So GPs and hospital doctors are firmly on my list, as are care homes.
I think that's almost a scary prospect of being on your list, Judith. The way you're speaking there. But more seriously, how should Charles Bonnet Syndrome be treated?
Well, I think what we desperately need is, in the medical profession, they call it a pathway. So we need this pathway created from the probably ophthalmologist who asks the question of the patient, are you by any chance seeing something that you clearly know is not there? Because if you are, don't worry about it. Let me know, and we can then place you on this pathway for treatment and support. And they can at the same time send them to me, and I can support them in all ways that I can. Now, Dr. Dominic Fitch has a list, and I have the list too, of medication which can be tried if the hallucinations are just so distressing that you can't live with them 24 hours a day, as some people have to do. It's not CBS specific, but it has been known to work. Not everything works for everybody. We have coping strategies to kind of shunt the brain into another gear, which I can always send out too. And it's also important to remember that there is certain medication taken for other conditions which has visual hallucinations as a side effect. So if you've got Charles Bonnet Syndrome as well, you're getting a double whammy. And it's useful to try and have the GP switch it to a different brand or a different medication.
I'm guessing that owing to COVID, you weren't able actually to visit Weatherfield itself.
No, I wasn't. I was so disappointed, because initially last summer when this all started, we kind of thought by now it would all be done. And they said, yes, you must come up and watch the recording. And I was so looking forward to doing that, but no.
I was going to ask you whether you could let us into any Corrie secrets. There'll be devotees of the programme wondering what's going to happen next. And I guess because you didn't get to Weatherfield,
no,
you aren't aware of any.
I am not aware of any secrets, no. And they are, they do keep the whole storyline very close to their chests. Quite rightly too. I mean, I was sworn to secrecy until just last week.
On a more serious note, there are a lot of blind and partially sighted actors out there struggling to make their way into the theatre and on television. Do you think Coronation Street should have considered using a visually impaired actor to portray this condition?
No, because this is a regular character in the soap who has developed a condition. You can't really change the actor midstream, but Coronation Street is absolutely brilliant at using, for instance, there is a character who is deaf, and that is portrayed by a deaf actor. There is a character in and out of a wheelchair, and that is portrayed by an actor with whatever the condition is. So I think they are very, very careful about it. But Johnny, the character's name, developed MS and developed sight loss. So you just couldn't, you couldn't change the character. You couldn't change the actor in the middle.
Well, you can tell that this is a podcast and not a professional radio program because Judith's doorbell just went, but she's back with us now. Everything sorted?
Everything sorted. Sorry about that. It's, working from home, hopeless.
Well, great. I mean, just finally, Judith, I mean, this must be an enormous coup for Esme's Umbrella. Are you expecting a real increase in the number of calls to helplines and, emails from your website, etc.?
I hope so. Yes, I hope that people sitting at home will either think, oh, that's what I've got, now I can find some help. Or they will think, oh, that's what my sister's got, or my niece has got, or my daughter's got, or my son's got, or whatever it might be. And I am hoping that this will open the door to people and that Charles Bonnet Syndrome will come way out of the shadows into centre stage, because it is a condition which is caused by sight loss from anything. It's not a condition on its own. It is only there because of sight loss. But I do have to say that last year, no, the year before now, we're in 2021, I, with help from a couple of very eminent ophthalmologists here and in America, I persuaded the World Health Organization to give Charles Bonnet Syndrome its own coding in ICD-11, which is the taxonomy of diseases and conditions. And that means that it is there, it is a condition, and hopefully Coronation Street airing it will be such a huge step in the right direction. And please, anybody out there, if you need help, contact Esme's Umbrella. You
mentioned that people should contact you. How can they go about doing that?
They can email me. That is the easiest. And my email address is Esme's Umbrella, all lowercase, no dots, no apostrophes, Esme's Umbrella @gmail.com.
Judith Potts, thank you very much indeed. And I hope the featuring of Charles Bonnet Syndrome in Coronation Street has the desired effect and raises awareness. So yes, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, not at all, Tom. I'm so grateful to you.
My pleasure. That then is Judith Potts. And as always at the end of my That'll Be the Day podcasts, here is That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band, The Vow.
I bless my inner visions of you. So what if that's a strange thing to do? My heart won't stop bleeding, always needing, it just keeps leading me on. Down through the years, beating the way into your life, yeah, that'll be the day your open invitation comes my way. That'll be the day when all my inhibitions melt away. And who is not to say we'll raise the shallow wreck of yesterday. If only I knew how. I've died too many times on this stage by slow disgrace. The big wheel keeps turning, but I'm still learning to wind down on the way home. I'm out of the cold, out of the rain, and into your arms. Well, that'll be the day your open invitation comes my way. That'll be the day when patience melt away, and who is not to say? We'll raise the shallow wreck of yesterday, and I will love you if only I knew how. That'll be the day. That'll be the day. That'll be the day when I will love you if only I